There's a man who comes into our store every night at exactly 3:47 a.m. and buys the same thing: a pack of Marlboro Reds, a cup of black coffee, and a copy of the Skagit Valley Herald. He's huge, maybe 6'5", with hands the size of dinner plates and sawdust permanently ground into the creases of his flannel shirt. He never speaks, just puts a $20 bill on the counter and leaves without waiting for change. The weird part isn't his routine or his silence. The weird part is that he's been coming in every single night for 16 years, and he hasn't aged a day. I know because my manager showed me the security footage from 2008. There he is, same flannel shirt, same weathered face, same sawdust, buying the same 3 items at exactly 3:47 a.m. When I asked who he was, my manager looked at me like I'd asked him to describe his own funeral. "That's Paul Hendricks," he said, "and you need to understand something important. Paul Hendricks died in a logging accident in 1987. I laughed because I thought my manager was messing with me. New guy hazing, Pacific Northwest style. But he pulled out a newspaper clipping from 1987, yellowed and fragile, with a headline that read, "Local logger killed in no accident." The photo showed the same man, Paul Hendricks, aged 34, crushed when a loader malfunctioned at the old Cascade timber mill outside Concrete, Washington. The photo was taken 2 weeks before his death, and he was holding a cup of coffee and a newspaper, smiling at the camera. "He doesn't know he's dead," my manager whispered. His name was Gunnar Larson, third-generation Scandinavian stock, and his hands were shaking. He's still living that last normal morning over and over, and if you break his routine, if you talk to him, if you don't have his cigarettes in stock, if you ask him a question, he remembers. And when he remembers what happened to him, when he realizes he's been dead for 36 years, Gunnar pulled up his shirt to show me a scar that ran from his collarbone to his belt, jagged and deep like something with claws had tried to open him up. He tried to take me with him, tried to make me understand what it's like to be crushed by 2 tons of timber, to feel your spine snap and your lungs fill with blood and splinters. He wanted me to know. He wanted me to die the way he died, so he wouldn't be alone. My name is Derek Halverson, and for the past 8 months, I've worked the graveyard shift at the Cascade Corner Stop on the outskirts of Concrete, Washington, population 705, nestled in the foothills where Highway 20 winds toward the North Cascades. What I'm about to tell you isn't a ghost story. It's a survival guide. Because Paul Hendricks isn't the only one trapped in this place, and the rules I'm about to share might save your life, or your soul. The Cascade Corner Stop sits at the junction where Baker Lake Road splits off from Highway 20, about 3 miles east of Concrete proper. During the day, it's unremarkable. A squat cinderblock building with 2 gas pumps, a hand-painted sign advertising live bait and espresso, and a parking lot that floods every November when the Skagit River swells past its banks. But at night, when the fog rolls down from Mount Baker and the Douglas firs crowd close enough to scrape the roof with their branches, the store feels less like a business and more like an outpost. The last warm light before the wilderness swallows everything. My first solo shift started on a Thursday in October. Gunnar had trained me for 2 weeks, always hovering, always watching the door like he expected something to walk through it. When he finally handed me the keys, his expression reminded me of my father the day he taught me to use a chainsaw, equal parts trust and terror. "Read this before midnight," he said, pressing a laminated sheet into my hands. "Memorize it. Don't deviate. And for the love of God, Derek, don't try to be a hero." I looked down at the paper. At the top, someone had typed, "Night Shift Protocols," in a plain font. Below that, 7 rules, numbered and spaced like commandments. I almost laughed again. Almost. The Gunner's scar was still fresh in my memory, that ragged trench of tissue running down his torso like a map of violence. So I read the rules. Rule 1. The man in the flannel shirt arrives at 3:47 a.m. Have a pack of Marlboro Reds, a cup of black coffee, no cream, no sugar, and the current day's newspaper ready on the counter before he enters. Do not speak to him. Do not make eye contact. Accept the $20 bill he places on the counter, and do not offer change. Let him leave in silence. Rule 2. Between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., you may hear a child crying in the stockroom. Do not investigate. Do not open the stockroom door. The crying will stop at exactly 2 a.m. If it continues past 2:01 a.m., leave the store immediately through the front entrance and do not return until sunrise. Rule 3. A woman in a blue rain jacket may enter the store between midnight and 4 a.m. She will browse the snack aisle, but never purchase anything. If she approaches the counter and asks, "Have you seen my daughter?" respond only with, "She's waiting for you at home." Any other response is dangerous. Rule 4. The payphone outside has been disconnected since 1994. If it rings, do not answer it. If a customer attempts to answer it, stop them by any means necessary. Rule 5. On nights when the fog is thick enough to obscure the gas pumps, you may notice a logging truck parked at the far end of the lot. Its headlights will be on, but the cab will be empty. Do not approach the truck. Do not look directly at the cargo it carries. Rule 6. If the lights flicker 3 times in rapid succession, go to the bathroom and lock the door. Count to 300 slowly. Do not leave until you have finished counting, regardless of what you hear. Rule 7. Between 4 a.m. and 4:30 a.m., the store may become very cold. You may see frost forming on the windows. During this time, a young man in a concrete high school letterman jacket may enter. He will ask to use the phone to call his mother. Give him the cordless phone from behind the counter. Let him dial. The call will not connect, but let him try. When he hangs up, he will thank you and leave. This is acceptable. I read the list 3 times. Then I set it on the counter and stared out at the empty parking lot, where the last light of dusk was bleeding into the tree line. Part of me, the rational part, the part that had graduated from Western Washington University with a degree in forestry management, wanted to dismiss the whole thing as an elaborate prank. Small-town weirdness. Something the locals did to mess with newcomers. But I'd grown up in Cedro Woolley, just 20 minutes down the road. I'd heard the stories about these woods since I was a kid. The loggers who vanished near Sauk Mountain and were never found. The lights people saw floating over Ross Lake. The sounds that came from the old-growth forests at night. Sounds that didn't match any animal in the guidebooks. I tucked the laminated sheet under the register and poured myself a cup of coffee. It was going to be a long night. The first few hours passed without incident. A couple of truckers stopped for diesel and energy drinks around 9 p.m. A group of hikers heading back from a late climb on Sauk Mountain bought trail mix and asked if I knew whether the ranger station at Rockport was still open. I didn't. By 11 p.m., the store was empty, and the silence had a weight to it. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat, the subtle creak of the buildings settling against the October cold. I restocked the cigarette rack, making sure the Marlboro Reds were in their proper place. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, timing it so it would still be hot at 3:47 a.m. I found the stack of newspapers Gunnar had left. Tomorrow's edition of the Skagit Valley Herald, delivered early to the store because the morning driver didn't want to make the trip twice. Everything by the book. Everything according to the rules. At 11:47 p.m., the bell above the door chimed. She walked in slowly, her movements unhurried, almost dreamlike. A woman in her mid-40s, wearing a blue rain jacket, the old kind, with the snap buttons and the hood lined with something that might have once been fleece. The jacket was faded, The blue washed out to something closer to gray, and it was soaked through even though it hadn't rained in 3 days. I watched her from behind the counter as she drifted toward the snack aisle. She didn't acknowledge me, didn't even seem to notice I was there. Rule 3. The woman in the blue rain jacket. I gripped the edge of the counter and forced myself to stay still, to watch without watching, to keep my expression neutral. She moved between the shelves like someone searching for something she'd lost a long time ago. Her hands reached out occasionally, fingers brushing against bags of chips and candy bars, but she never picked anything up, never committed to a choice, just that endless, aimless browsing, her wet sneakers squeaking softly against the linoleum. I noticed details I wished I hadn't. The way her hair hung in damp clumps, plastered to her neck. The way her skin had a grayish pallor, like someone who'd spent too long in cold water. The way her eyes, when they finally flicked toward me, seemed to look through me rather than at me, focused on something in a middle distance I couldn't see. She browsed for almost 15 minutes. I pretended to organize the lottery tickets, keeping her in my peripheral vision, my pulse thudding in my ears. Then she stopped. She turned toward the counter, and for a moment, she just stood there at the end of the snack aisle, her head tilted slightly, her lips parted as if she were about to speak. The fluorescent light above her flickered once, just once, and in that split second of darkness, I could have sworn her face changed. The features slackened, the eyes widened, and something that looked like water trickled from the corner of her mouth. Then the light steadied, and she was just a woman again. A sad, lost-looking woman in a faded blue jacket. She approached the counter with slow, shuffling steps. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was soft, hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours, or screaming. "Have you seen my daughter?" The words from the rules flashed through my mind. I swallowed hard and forced them out, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's waiting for you at home." The woman blinked. For a moment, something shifted in her expression. A flicker of confusion. Maybe hope. Maybe something darker. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Home," she repeated, tasting the word like it was foreign to her. She's waiting?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak again. The woman stared at me for a long moment. I could see the veins beneath her pale skin, blue and branching like rivers on a map. I could smell something coming off her. Not rot, exactly, but something damp and cold and old. Lake water, algae, the mineral tang of glacial runoff. "Thank you," she whispered finally. "Thank you. I've been looking for so long." She turned and walked toward the door, her movements still slow, still dreamlike. The bell chimed as she pushed through, and then she was gone, swallowed by the fog that had crept in while I wasn't paying attention. I stood frozen behind the counter for a full minute before I could move. My hands were shaking when I finally poured myself a cup of coffee, and I had to set it down twice before I could bring it to my lips without spilling. The rules were real. Whatever Gunnar had tried to tell me, whatever I'd dismissed as small-town superstition, it was real. That woman, whoever she'd been, whatever she'd become, wasn't browsing for snacks. She was searching for something she'd lost, something she'd been searching for, God knows how long, trapped in a loop of grief and confusion and need. I pulled out my phone and searched for drowning accidents near Concrete, Washington. It didn't take long to find the story. Margaret Olson, 43 years old. Her 7-year-old daughter, Emma, had wandered away from a family picnic at Baker Lake in the summer of 1998. Margaret had gone into the water after her when Emma's inflatable raft drifted too far from shore. The water was colder than she expected. Snow melt from Mount Baker, barely 50 degrees even in July. Her muscles had cramped. She'd gone under. They'd found Emma crying on the shore an hour later, confused but unharmed. The raft had drifted back on its own. They'd found Margaret's body 3 days later, tangled in the weeds near the lake's eastern inlet. She was still wearing her blue rain jacket, the one she'd grabbed when the clouds started rolling in, the one she'd never had a chance to take off. I set my phone down and stared at the door. "She's waiting for you at home." That's what the rules said to tell her. That's what kept her calm, kept her from remembering. Because in Margaret's mind, she was still looking, still searching, still hoping to find her daughter before it was too late. She didn't know that Emma had survived. She didn't know that her sacrifice had worked. And something told me that if she ever found out, if she ever remembered the cold and the dark and the water filling her lungs, she wouldn't leave quietly. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like something hungry, and the night was only beginning. If you like the stories, please hype the videos from a button like this just above the comment section. It helps the videos to get more reach and perform well. It would take just a few seconds and cost nothing, but would help the channel grow even faster. Thank you. The clock on the wall read 12:47 a.m. when I finally stopped shaking. I'd gone through the motions, wiping down the coffee station, checking the refrigerator temperatures, logging the till count on the clipboard Gunnar kept by the register. Normal tasks, grounding tasks, things that reminded me I was still in the real world, still working a regular job at a regular store, even if the clientele was anything but regular. Margaret Olson. I kept thinking about her name, her face, the way she'd said thank you, like I'd given her something precious. All I'd done was follow the script. All I'd done was lie to her. "She's waiting for you at home." Emma Olson would be in her early 30s now, if my math was right. Probably married, maybe with kids of her own, living somewhere far from Baker Lake, far from the memory of the day her mother went into the water and never came back. Did she know her mother was still searching? Still wandering the aisles of a gas station at midnight, asking strangers if they'd seen her little girl? I pushed the thought away and focused on the stockroom door. It sat at the back of the store, past the coolers full of beer and energy drinks, past the rack of fishing lures and the shelf of motor oil. A plain gray door with a deadbolt that Gunnar had specifically told me to keep locked after 10 p.m. "The stockroom's off limits during your shift," he'd said. "I don't care if we run out of something. I don't care if a customer complains. You don't open that door between midnight and sunrise. Understood?" I'd understood. I just hadn't believed him. At 1:07 a.m., I started to believe. It began as a whisper. So faint I thought I had imagined it. A soft, hitching sound, like someone trying to catch their breath. I muted the radio I'd been playing, classic rock from a station out of Bellingham, and listened. Nothing. I turned the radio back on, told myself it was the building settling, the wind outside, my own nerves playing tricks after the encounter with Margaret. Then I heard it again, louder this time, clearer. A child crying. The sound came from behind the stockroom door, muffled but distinct. A little girl, from the pitch of it. Maybe 5 or 6 years old. The kind of crying that starts in the chest and works its way up, wet and ragged and full of fear. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to open that door, to help, to find whoever was back there and make sure they were okay. But Gunnar's rules were burned into my brain now, seared there by the memory of Margaret's hollow eyes and damp rot smell. Rule 2. Between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., you may hear a child crying in the stockroom. Do not investigate. Do not open the stockroom door. I gripped the counter and stayed where I was. The crying continued. It rose and fell in waves, sometimes fading to a whimper, sometimes building to a wail that made my teeth ache. I could hear words in it now, fragments broken by sobs. "Mommy, please, I want to go home. It's dark. Mommy, please." My eyes burned. My hands curled into fists. I thought about Gunner's scar, the ragged line carved into his flesh, and I stayed behind the counter. The clock ticked forward. 1:23 a.m. 1:34 a.m. 1:41 a.m. The crying didn't stop. If anything, it grew more desperate, more frantic. I heard small fists pounding against the door. Thud, thud, thud. A rhythm that matched my own heartbeat. "Please let me out. Please. I can't find the way. It's so cold." I was crying too, I realized. Tears streaming down my face. My jaw clenched so tight my molars ached. But I didn't move. I didn't open the door. At 1:58 a.m., the crying changed. The little girl's voice dropped an octave, then another, until it didn't sound like a child anymore. It sounded like something imitating a child. Something that had learned the words, but not the meaning behind them. The sobs became mechanical, repetitive, a recording played on a loop that was starting to skip. "Mommy, please, mommy, please, mommy, please, mommy, please." Then silence. I checked the clock. 2 a.m. exactly. The stockroom door rattled once, hard enough to shake dust from the frame, and then everything went still. I stood there for 5 full minutes, not moving, barely breathing. When I finally trusted my legs to work, I walked to the door and pressed my ear against the cold metal. Nothing. No sound. No movement. Just the hum of the refrigerators and the distant rumble of a truck on Highway 20. I didn't open the door. I didn't even touch the deadbolt. Instead, I went back to the counter and pulled out my phone again. This time, I searched for missing children in Skagit County. The results were sparse. This wasn't a high-crime area, never had been, but one case stood out. Lily Johansson, age 6, went missing in November 1971 while playing near the old logging roads east of Concrete. Search parties combed the woods for 2 weeks. Tracking dogs lost her scent at the junction where Baker Lake Road met Highway 20, the same junction where the Cascade Corner stop now stood. They never found her body. Some folks said she'd wandered into an abandoned mine shaft. Others claimed she'd been taken by a drifter passing through. A few old-timers, the ones who still remembered the stories their grandparents told, whispered that the woods themselves had taken her, that the forests up here were hungry, and sometimes they kept what they caught. I stared at the photo accompanying the article. A school portrait, black and white, showing a gap-toothed girl with blonde pigtails and a shy smile. Lily Johansson had been crying behind that door for over 50 years. I was still processing this when the payphone rang. It sat outside, bolted to the wall near the ice machine, a relic from another era, its blue paint chipped and faded, the receiver hanging from a corroded metal cord. Gunner had told me it hadn't worked since 1994, when the phone company finally stopped servicing the rural lines. But it was ringing now, a shrill, insistent sound that cut through the night like a blade. Rule 4. The payphone outside has been disconnected since 1994. If it rings, do not answer it. I watched through the window as the phone continued to ring. Once, twice, 5 times, 10. On the 15th ring, I saw something move near the edge of the parking lot. A figure, standing just beyond the reach of the store's lights. Tall and thin, dressed in what looked like work clothes. Canvas pants, heavy boots, a jacket with reflective strips on the sleeves. The kind of outfit a road crew worker might wear. The figure raised one hand and pointed at the payphone. Then it pointed at me. The phone kept ringing. The figure didn't move. And somewhere in the distance, I heard the rumble of an engine. Low and heavy, like a logging truck grinding its way up the mountain. I stepped back from the window and didn't look outside again until the ringing finally stopped, 23 minutes later. By then, the figure was gone, but the fog had grown thicker, and through it, I could just make out the shape of something parked at the far end of the lot. A truck, a logging truck. Its headlights were on, but the cab was empty. I didn't look at the logging truck. That was Rule 5. And after what I'd just experienced with Lily and the payphone, I wasn't about to test my luck. Instead, I focused on preparation. The clock read 3:12 a.m. 35 minutes until Paul Hendricks walked through that door. I checked the cigarette rack for the third time. Marlboro Reds, full stock, positioned at eye level where I could grab them without hesitation. I poured a fresh cup of black coffee into one of the ceramic mugs we kept behind the counter. Not the paper cups we gave to regular customers, but the heavy white mugs with the faded Cascade Corner Stop logo. Gunnar had been specific about that. Paul always drank from a real mug, he'd told me. The paper ones didn't exist when he was alive. You give him paper and he notices. You don't want him to notice anything. The newspaper was already on the counter, folded the way Gunnar had shown me. Sports section on top, headlines visible, exactly how a newsstand would display it in 1987. I'd even removed the colored advertising inserts that came with modern editions. Every detail mattered. Every detail kept Paul anchored in his loop, kept him believing that this was just another morning before his shift at the mill. At 3:31 a.m., I heard the truck's engine rev. Not from the parking lot, from somewhere deeper in the fog, somewhere out on the logging roads that wound up into the mountains. The sound was wrong, though. Too loud, too close, like the truck was driving through the store instead of past it. I felt the vibration in my chest, in my teeth, a bass rumble that made the coffee in the mug ripple and dance. Then silence. I gripped the counter and waited. At 3:44 a.m., the fog outside shifted, parted, like something massive was moving through it, displacing the moisture with its passage. At 3:46 a.m., I saw him. Paul Hendricks emerged from the fog like a man stepping out of a photograph. He was exactly as Gunnar had described, 6'5", broad-shouldered, with hands that could palm a basketball and a face weathered by decades of outdoor work. His flannel shirt was red and black checked, the fabric worn soft at the elbows, and sawdust clung to every crease and fold. His jeans were stained with oil and pine sap. His boots left prints on the asphalt that I knew would be gone by morning. He walked with the steady, unhurried gait of a man who knew exactly where he was going and exactly what he wanted. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just purpose, pure and simple. At 3:47 a.m., exactly, the bell above the door chimed. Paul Hendricks stepped inside. The temperature in the store dropped 10 degrees in an instant. I could see my breath fogging in front of my face, could feel the cold seeping through my jacket and into my bones. But I didn't shiver. I didn't react. I kept my eyes fixed on the counter, on the items I'd prepared, and I waited. He moved through the store without browsing, past the snack aisle where Margaret had wandered, past the coolers and the fishing lures, straight to the counter where I stood. His footsteps were heavy but steady, and with each one I caught a whiff of something that didn't belong in a convenience store. Pine resin, machine oil, fresh-cut timber, and underneath it all, something else, something copper-sweet and wrong. He stopped in front of me. I didn't look at his face. Gunnar had warned me about that too. Don't meet his eyes, he'd said. Don't give him a reason to see you. You're just a cashier. You're furniture. You're part of the scenery, and scenery doesn't have a face. So I stared at his hands instead. Those massive, calloused hands, scarred from years of chainsaw work and log hauling. I watched as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet, extracted a $20 bill, and placed it on the counter with the same careful precision he must have used 1,000 times before. I slid the cigarettes toward him, then the coffee, then the newspaper. He picked up each item with that same measured calm. The cigarettes went into his shirt pocket. The coffee he cradled in both hands, lifting it to his lips for a single long sip. The newspaper he tucked under his arm without unfolding it. For a moment, everything was fine. The transaction was complete. The loop was intact. Paul Hendricks would turn around, walk out the door, and disappear into the fog until tomorrow night. Then the radio crackled. I'd forgotten to turn it off. The classic rock station had been playing quietly in the background all night, and I'd tuned it out hours ago. But now, in the pregnant silence of Paul's visit, a commercial break ended and the song began, Livin' on a Prayer by Bon Jovi, released in 1986. Paul's hands stopped moving. The coffee mug hovered an inch from his lips, frozen in place. I saw his shoulders tense beneath the flannel, saw his head begin to turn. I lunged for the radio and killed the power. Silence crashed back into the store like a wave. I stood there with my hand on the radio's dial, my heart slamming against my ribs, not daring to breathe. Paul Hendricks remained motionless for 5 seconds. 10. 15. Then, slowly, he lowered the coffee mug. His shoulders relaxed. His head turned back toward the door. He left without looking at me. The bell chimed. The fog swallowed him whole. I collapsed against the counter, my legs giving out beneath me. The $20 bill sat where he'd left it, crisp and unwrinkled despite being 37 years old. I picked it up with trembling fingers and studied the face of Andrew Jackson, the serial number, the treasury seal. It was real, solid, a piece of 1987 currency somehow preserved through whatever force kept Paul anchored to this place. I put it in the register with the others. Gunnar had shown me the stack of 20s in the safe, all from the same era, all from Paul's nightly visits. 16 years of $20 bills, none of them spent, all of them waiting for something. The radio. That's what had almost broken the loop. A song from his lifetime. Something that might have jogged his memory, might have made him realize that 37 years had passed since he'd last heard it on a construction site or in a truck cab. I thought about what Gunnar had said, about Paul wanting him to understand what it felt like to die, to feel his spine snap, his lungs fill with blood and splinters, 2 tons of timber crushing him into something unrecognizable. If the loop had broken tonight, would Paul have done that to me? I looked at the counter where his hands had rested. Faint impressions remained in the laminate surface, not scratches, but something deeper. Pressure marks, like the wood itself remembered the weight of him. Outside, the fog was beginning to thin. The logging truck at the edge of the lot had vanished, leaving no tire tracks, no evidence it had ever been there. I poured the untouched coffee down the sink and washed the mug twice with scalding water. The clock read 4:02 a.m., and somewhere in the distance, I heard what sounded like a phone ringing. Not the payphone this time, but something else. Something coming from inside the store. Rule 7 was about to begin. The cold came first. It rolled through the store like a tide, starting at the edges and working inward. I watched frost crystals bloom on the window glass, spreading in feathered patterns that caught the fluorescent light and scattered it into tiny rainbows. My breath came out in white plumes, and I could feel the moisture in my nose beginning to freeze. Rule 7. Between 4 a.m. and 4:30 a.m., the storm may become very cold. I pulled my jacket tighter and checked the cordless phone behind the counter. Gunnar had shown me where he kept it, an old landline handset, the kind with the retractable antenna and the rubber buttons that stuck when you pressed them. It was charged and functional, connected to a base station that hadn't made an outgoing call in years. The line's dead, Gunnar had explained. Has been since 09 when we switched to the new system. But it doesn't matter. He doesn't need the call to connect. He just needs to try. At 4:07 a.m., the bell chimed. He was younger than I'd expected. 17, maybe 18, with the gangly build of someone still growing into his frame. His Letterman jacket was green and gold, concrete high school colors, with a varsity letter for wrestling and a graduation year patch that read 1994. His jeans were torn at the knee, and his sneakers were the old canvas kind that nobody wore anymore. But it was his face that stopped me. He looked confused, lost, like someone who'd woken up in a strange place and couldn't quite remember how he'd gotten there. His eyes darted around the store, taking in the energy drink displays and the touchscreen register and the LED price signs, all things that hadn't existed in 1994. For a moment, I was afraid the loop would break right there, that he'd see something that didn't belong and start to remember. But then his gaze landed on me, and something in his expression settled. I was familiar. I was a cashier behind a counter, same as any cashier in any convenience store in any decade. I was the anchor that kept him tethered. "Hey," he said. His voice cracked on the word, the way teenage boys' voices do when they're nervous. "Hey, is there a phone I could use? I need to call my mom." I reached under the counter and pulled out the cordless handset. "Here," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Friendly, but not too friendly. Just a guy doing his job. "Take your time." He accepted the phone with both hands, cradling it like something precious. I watched him punch in a number, 7 digits, no area code, the way people dialed before cell phones made everything 10 digits, and raised the handset to his ear. He waited. I knew the call wouldn't connect. Gunnar had told me as much. But watching him stand there, listening to dead air, hoping for his mother's voice to answer, it hollowed something out in my chest. "Come on," he whispered. "Come on, Mom. Pick up. I'm going to be late. I told her I'd be home by midnight. She's going to be so worried." He dialed again, and again. Each time, his movements grew more frantic, his breathing more ragged. Why isn't it working? He looked at me, and there were tears in his eyes. Why can't I get through? I just need to tell her I'm okay. I just need to tell her I'm coming home. "Sometimes the lines go down this late," I said. The lie tasted like ash on my tongue. "Weather interference. It happens out here." He nodded, wanting to believe me. Needing to believe me. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I'll try again in a minute." He dialed once more, listened, let the phone drop to his side. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting me try." "Of course." He set the phone on the counter, gave me a small, sad smile, and walked toward the door. The bell chimed as he pushed through it, and then he was gone, absorbed by the fog that still clung to the edges of the parking lot. I stood there for a long time after he left. His name was Tommy Bergstrom. I didn't need to search for him online. I'd already seen the memorial plaque when I was a student at Concrete High, back before I'd left for college. Class of 1994. Dead 3 months before graduation. He'd been driving home from a wrestling tournament in Mount Vernon when his pickup truck hit a patch of black ice on Highway 20. The truck had rolled 4 times before coming to rest in the ditch. Tommy had been thrown from the vehicle. He'd died on impact, according to the coroner's report. But his mother, a woman named Ingrid who'd worked at the elementary school cafeteria, had told anyone who would listen that she'd heard her phone ring at 11:47 p.m. that night. Once, twice, 3 times. When she'd answered, there was nothing but static. She'd always believed it was Tommy, trying to call home, trying to tell her he was okay. I picked up the cordless phone and checked the call log. Empty, as I'd expected. No record of the numbers he'd dialed. No evidence he'd been here at all. But the handset was cold in my palm, far colder than the ambient temperature could account for. And when I held it to my ear, Just for a moment, I thought I heard something. Not static, not silence. Breathing. Soft and slow, like someone waiting on the other end of a line that had been dead for 30 years. I put the phone away and didn't touch it again. The frost on the windows was beginning to melt. The temperature in the store was rising, degree by degree, as the clock crept toward 4:30 a.m. I made myself another cup of coffee, my fourth of the night, and tried to process what I'd witnessed. 4 of them. 4 visitors in a single shift, each one trapped in a loop of their own making, each one drawn to this store like moths to a porch light. Why here? Why this particular building, this particular junction? I thought about what I knew. The store sat at the intersection of Baker Lake Road and Highway 20, about 3 miles east of Concrete. Before the store was built in 1983, the land had been part of the old Cascade Timber Holdings, logging roads and equipment yards, staging areas for the crews that worked the mountains. 3 logging roads, I realized. The junction wasn't just 2 streets crossing. It was 3 old logging roads that had been paved over and incorporated into the modern highway system. A crossroads, in the old sense of the word. My grandmother had told me stories about crossroads when I was young. She'd grown up in the old country, Norway, before her family emigrated in the 1920s, and she'd carried the folklore with her like luggage. Crossroads were liminal places, she'd said, thresholds between worlds. The dead gathered there because it was the last place they remembered being alive, the last point where their paths hadn't yet been decided. The dead don't know they're dead, she'd told me once, her accent thickening the way it always did when she spoke of such things. They keep walking the roads they walked in life, looking for the turn they missed. And sometimes, if you're not careful, they'll ask you for directions. I'd dismissed it as old-world superstition at the time. But standing in the Cascade Corner stop at 4:30 in the morning, surrounded by the fading cold of Tommy Bergstrom's visit, I wasn't so sure anymore. The store wasn't just a building. It was a way station. A place where the loops intersected, where the dead could act out their final moments in something resembling peace. And the rules, Gunner's rules, the protocols that had kept this place running for decades, weren't about protecting the employees. They were about protecting the dead. Margaret Olson needed to believe her daughter was waiting at home. Lily Johansson needed to cry out her grief in the darkness of the stockroom. Paul Hendricks needed his cigarettes and coffee and newspaper, needed the ritual of an ordinary morning before everything went wrong. Tommy Bergstrom needed to dial his mother's number, needed to try. The rules gave them that. The rules kept them anchored in their loops, kept them from remembering the truth of what had happened to them. And when the loops broke, when someone spoke the wrong words, or asked the wrong questions, or let a song from 1986 play on the radio, the dead remembered. They felt their deaths all over again, and they reached out for the nearest living person, desperate to share that burden, desperate not to be alone in their agony. Gunner's scar made sense now. He must have broken Paul's loop somehow, said the wrong thing, or made eye contact at the wrong moment. And Paul had tried to drag him down into the memory of 2 tons of timber and a spine that snapped like a dry branch. I looked around the store, at the fluorescent lights, the racks of snacks, the coffee station I'd maintained all night, and saw it differently now. Not a workplace, a sanctuary, a place where the dead could rest, if only for a few hours, before the sun rose and sent them back to wherever they went during the day. The clock read 4:58 a.m. Almost dawn, almost through my first shift. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. Rule 6. Go to the bathroom, lock the door, count to 300. I was already moving before the 3rd flicker ended. The bathroom was small. barely large enough for a toilet, a sink, and a single person standing between them. I locked the door behind me, threw the deadbolt for good measure, and pressed my back against the wall. Then I started counting. 1, 2, 3. The lights in the bathroom stayed steady, but I could hear the ones in the main store buzzing and popping, the sound of electricity arcing through dying filaments. Something was moving out there. Something heavy, dragging itself across the linoleum with a wet, grinding sound. 15, 16, 17. A shadow passed under the door. Not a human shadow. The proportions were wrong, the shape too elongated. Too many angles where angles shouldn't be. It paused at the threshold, and I heard breathing. Deep, labored breathing, like lungs that were full of fluid trying to force air through anyway. 32, 33, 34. Something scratched at the door. Not knocking, scratching. Slow, exploratory, like fingers testing the grain of the wood. The deadbolt rattled in its housing. 51, 52, 53. A voice, low, gurgling, barely recognizable as human speech. Let me in. I kept counting. My lips moved without sound, forming the numbers like prayers. 78, 79, 80. I know you're in there. The voice was clearer now, but still wrong. Too wet, too thick, like someone speaking through a mouthful of mud. I can smell you, warm, alive. Let me in. I just want to talk. 99, 100, 101. The scratching intensified. I could hear wood splintering, could see tiny curls of paint falling from the door's surface as something sharp, claws, nails, the jagged edges of broken bone, carved grooves into the barrier between us. 144, 145. It hurts, the voice said, plaintive now, almost childlike. It hurts so much. Do you know what it's like? Do you know what it feels like to burn? To feel your skin bubble and peel? To smell yourself cooking? I squeezed my eyes shut and kept counting. 187, 188. The bathroom went cold. Not the gradual chill of Tommy Bergstrom's visit, but a sudden sharp plunge, like stepping into a walk-in freezer, like falling through ice into black water. My teeth chattered so hard I bit my tongue, tasted copper, kept counting anyway. 223, 224. The scratching stopped, the breathing stopped. Everything stopped. 271, 272. Silence. Complete and absolute, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes you wonder if you've gone deaf. 298, 299, 300. I waited another 30 seconds before I moved. Then, slowly, carefully, I reached for the deadbolt. The store was empty when I opened the door. The lights had stopped flickering, casting their normal pale glow across the aisles. The linoleum showed no scratches, no drag marks, no evidence that anything had been there at all. But the air smelled wrong. Smoke and char and something sweeter underneath. The sickly caramel scent of burned sugar or burned flesh. I found out later about the fire. A cabin on Baker Lake, summer of 1962. A family of 4 had been staying there when a propane leak ignited in the middle of the night. The father had managed to get his wife and son out, but he'd gone back for the daughter. Neither of them made it. His name was Harold Lindqvist. He'd been 36 years old. I never saw Harold directly. Whatever triggered Rule 6, whatever came scratching at the bathroom door on certain nights, it never fully manifested while I was hiding. But I heard him. I smelled him. And I understood, in a way that went beyond logic, that Harold Lindqvist was the reason the rule existed in the first place. Some loops weren't safe to witness. Some deaths were too violent, too agonizing to be contained by mere routine. The sun came up at 6:47 that morning. I watched it through the store windows, watched the fog burn away, and the Douglas firs emerge from the gray like old friends coming into focus. My replacement, a college kid named Eric who worked the day shift, showed up at 7, and I handed him the keys without a word. I drove home to my apartment in Cedro Woolley, collapsed into bed, and slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke up, I called Gunnar and told him I'd be back for my next shift. That was 8 months ago. I've worked the graveyard shift at the Cascade Corner stop ever since. I've seen Margaret Olson browse the snack aisle 43 times. I've heard Lily Johansson cry behind the stockroom door on nights when the moon is dark. I've served Paul Hendricks his cigarettes and coffee and newspaper without incident, keeping the radio off, keeping my eyes down, keeping the loop intact. I've learned things too. Things Gunnar never told me. Things I've had to piece together from old newspapers and county records and conversations with locals who remember when this land was nothing but timber and mud. The payphone caller, for instance. His name was Vern Gustafson, a road crew worker who'd been struck by a hit-and-run driver in 1994 while setting up warning signs for a construction zone. He'd crawled to the payphone outside what was then a small bait shop, the building that would later become the Cascade Corner stop, and tried to dial 911. He died before the ambulance arrived, the receiver still clutched in his hand. Vern's loop was different from the others. He didn't come inside the store. He just called, over and over, trying to reach someone who could help him. And when the phone went unanswered, he stood at the edge of the parking lot and pointed at whoever was inside. Pointed and waited. I don't know what happens if someone answers Vern's call. Gunnar wouldn't tell me, and I haven't been brave enough, or stupid enough, to find out. But I've started to wonder about something else. Something that goes beyond survival, beyond just following the rules and making it through another night. These people are trapped, stuck in loops of their own suffering, reliving their final moments for decades on end. Margaret has been searching for her daughter since 1998. Paul has been buying cigarettes since 1987. Lily has been crying in the darkness since 1971. That's not peace. That's not rest. That's a prison sentence with no end date. A purgatory built from memory and grief and the inability to let go. What if there was another way? The thought first occurred to me after Tommy Bergstrom's visit. His mother, Ingrid. I'd looked her up. She was still alive, living in a care facility in Burlington, 20 miles down the road. 87 years old, widowed twice, but still sharp, according to the staff I'd spoken to. She'd never stopped believing that Tommy had tried to call her that night. What if she could talk to him? What if she could tell him it was okay, that she'd gotten his message, that he could stop trying? Would that break the loop? Would that set him free? I didn't know. But I started researching anyway. Started tracking down the families of the dead, the people who'd been left behind when these loops began. Margaret's daughter, Emma, now a physical therapist in Bellingham with 2 kids of her own. Lily Johansson's younger brother, a retired schoolteacher in Anacortes, who still visited his sister's memorial every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. And Paul Hendricks' widow. Her name was Ruth. 89 years old, resident of the Evergreen Manor nursing home in Mount Vernon. She'd been 29 when Paul died, pregnant with their first child, a son who'd grown up without ever meeting his father. I found her room number. I found the visiting hours. I found myself sitting in the parking lot one Tuesday afternoon, staring at the building and trying to work up the courage to go inside. What was I supposed to say? "Hi, Mrs. Hendricks. Your husband has been visiting my convenience store every night for 37 years, and I think you might be the only person who can help him move on." She'd think I was insane, or worse, cruel. Some stranger dredging up the worst day of her life for reasons she couldn't understand. But I kept thinking about Paul's face. The way he moved through the store like a man sleepwalking, trapped in a morning that would never end. the way his hands left pressure marks on the counter, as if even in death he was trying to hold on to something solid. He deserved better than eternity in a loop. They all did. I got out of the car and walked toward the nursing home entrance. Ruth Hendricks had a room on the second floor of Evergreen Manor, overlooking a small garden where the residents could sit when the weather was mild. When I knocked on her door, she was sitting by the window in a wheelchair, a crocheted blanket across her lap, and a paperback novel open in her hands. "Mrs. Hendricks?" She looked up. Her eyes were sharp despite her age, pale blue, the color of glacier ice, framed by wrinkles that spoke of decades of laughter and grief in equal measure. "I don't know you," she said. Not accusatory, just observational. "No, ma'am. My name is Derek Halverson. I work at a store out near Concrete, and I wanted to talk to you about your husband." The sharpness in her eyes flickered. Something older surfaced there, something guarded. "Paul died in 1987, she said quietly. "If you're a reporter or one of those true crime people, I'm not interested. I've spent enough of my life answering questions about that day." "I'm not a reporter." I stepped into the room, closed the door behind me. "Mrs. Hendricks, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible. I know that, but I need you to hear me out, and then I need you to decide if you're willing to trust a stranger." She studied me for a long moment. Then she set down her book and folded her hands in her lap. "I've lived 89 years, she said. "I've buried 2 husbands and a son. I've seen things that would make a younger person run screaming. Whatever you have to say, I doubt it'll be the strangest thing I've heard." So I told her. I told her about the store, about the rules, about the visitors who came in the night. I told her about Paul, his flannel shirt and his sawdust-covered hands, his $20 bills, and his silent routine. I told her about the security footage from 2008, identical to the footage from 1992, identical to the description Gunnar had given me of every night since 1987. I told her that her husband was trapped, reliving his last normal morning before the accident, and that I thought she might be the only person who could set him free. Ruth listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on the garden outside the window. "He always did like his routine," she said finally. Her voice was thick, heavy with something I couldn't quite name. "Coffee and a cigarette before work. Newspaper on Sundays. He said it made him feel ready for whatever the day might bring. Mrs. Hendricks, he never got to meet our son." She turned to look at me, and I saw tears tracking down the creased landscape of her cheeks. "Danny was born 6 months after the accident, grew up without a father, spent his whole life wondering what Paul would have thought of him. He died 12 years ago. Heart attack, just like his grandfather." She laughed softly, bitterly. "Now they're all gone, and I'm the only one left. 90 years old and still waiting." Waiting for what? To see him again. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I've been waiting since 1987, Mr. Halverson. Every night before I go to sleep, I pray that I'll dream about him, that I'll get to tell him everything he missed. Danny's first steps, his wedding, the grandchildren he never got to hold." She shook her head. "But the dreams never come. I wake up every morning, and he's still gone." I knelt beside her wheelchair, brought myself to her eye level. "He's not gone," I said. "He's stuck. And I think if you come to the store, if you let him see you, let him hear your voice, he might finally be able to rest." Ruth looked at me with those glacier blue eyes, and I saw something shift in them. Fear, maybe. Hope. The desperate, fragile need to believe that miracles were still possible, even at the end of a long and difficult life. "When?" she asked. "Tonight, if you're willing." She reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were thin, papery, but her grip was stronger than I'd expected. "Take me to him." I borrowed a wheelchair-accessible van from the nursing home's transport service, signing forms and promising to have Ruth back before breakfast. The staff gave me skeptical looks, but Ruth vouched for me, told them I was a distant relative, that she wanted to visit an old family property one last time. We arrived at the Cascade Corner stop at 3:15 a.m. The store was quiet when I wheeled Ruth inside. I'd called Gunnar earlier, told him what I was planning. He'd been silent for a long moment, then said only, "I hope you know what you're doing." I didn't, but I was doing it anyway. I positioned Ruth near the counter, angled so she could see the door clearly. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the entrance, her breathing shallow and quick. "What if it doesn't work?" she whispered. "What if he doesn't recognize me? I was 29 when he died. Now look at me. I'm an old woman. He won't know who I am." "He'll know," I said. "Some things don't change." The minutes crawled past. 3:30, 3:40, 3:45. At 3:46, the fog outside began to shift. Ruth gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest, and then Paul Hendricks walked through the door. He was exactly as I'd seen him dozens of times before, tall, broad, sawdust-covered, his face weathered, and his hands scarred from a lifetime of labor. He moved toward the counter with that same steady gait, that same unconscious purpose, reaching for his wallet as he approached. Then he stopped. His eyes found Ruth. Something flickered across his face. Confusion, then recognition, then a grief so profound it seemed to age him 10 years in a single heartbeat. "Ruthie?" His voice cracked on the name, dry and unused and full of wonder. "Ruthie? Is that you?" She was crying now, tears streaming freely down her face, but she was smiling too. A smile I'd never seen on anyone before. Equal parts joy and sorrow and love. "It's me, Paul, it's me." He took a step toward her, then another. His movements were different now, hesitant, uncertain, nothing like the confident routine I'd witnessed so many times. He was seeing her, really seeing her, not as part of the loop, but as something new, something that shouldn't be there. "You're old," he said softly. Not cruel, just confused. "Ruthie, how long has it been?" 37 years, she whispered. 37 years, Paul, and I've missed you every single day." He fell to his knees in front of her wheelchair. His massive hands, those dinner plate hands that had terrified Gunnar, that had left pressure marks in the counter, reached out and cupped her face with a gentleness that made my throat close up. "The baby," he said. Wasn't a boy. Danny. She placed her hands over his, held them against her cheeks. "He looked just like you, Paul. Same eyes, same stubborn jaw. He grew up strong and kind, and he had 2 children of his own, your grandchildren." Paul made a sound. Not quite a sob, not quite a laugh. Something in between that seemed to tear itself from his chest. "I never got to meet him." "I know." Ruth leaned forward, pressed her forehead against his. "I know, my love. But it's okay now. You can rest. You can let go. I don't want to leave you again. You won't be leaving me." She pulled back, looked into his eyes. "I'll be with you soon. I'm 89 years old, Paul. I've been waiting all this time, and I'm tired too. So you go ahead. Find a place for us, and I'll be there before you know it." Paul stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. The change happened gradually at first. The sawdust on his shirt began to fade, then disappear. The lines on his face deepened, multiplied, spread like cracks in old leather. His hair, dark and thick, turned gray, then white, then thin as spider silk. In 36 seconds, Paul Hendricks aged 36 years. He was an old man now, stooped, frail, his hands trembling as they held Ruth's face. But he was smiling. A real smile, free of confusion, free of the loop that had trapped him for so long. "I love you, Ruthie," he said. "I never stopped." "I know," she whispered. "I know." He kissed her forehead. Then he closed his eyes, exhaled one long breath, and was gone. Not vanished. Gone. Released. Like smoke dispersing in a breeze. Like morning fog burning away in the sunlight. Ruth sat in silence, her hands still raised to where his face had been. Tears fell from her chin onto her lap, but she was still smiling. "Thank you," she said quietly, without looking at me. "Thank you for bringing me to him." Outside, the first gray light of dawn was touching the peaks of the North Cascades. Ruth Hendricks passed away in her sleep 11 days after our visit to the store. The nurses said she went peacefully, a small smile on her face, her hand resting on an old photograph of a young man in a flannel shirt. I attended her funeral. Stood in the back, didn't speak to anyone. But I watched as they lowered her casket into the ground beside a headstone that read, "Paul Hendricks, 1953 to 1987, beloved husband and father. Together again, after all those years." Paul hasn't returned to the Cascade Corner stop since that night. His loop is closed, his routine finally broken by something stronger than memory. Love, maybe, or forgiveness, or simply the permission to let go. The stack of $20 bills in the safe remains untouched. Gunnar says we should donate them somewhere, but neither of us has figured out where yet. I've been busy with other things. Emma Olson, Margaret's daughter, the one who survived the lake, drove up from Bellingham on a rainy Tuesday in November. She was nervous, skeptical, convinced I was running some kind of scam. But she came anyway, because some part of her had never stopped wondering about the mother she'd lost when she was 7 years old. Margaret appeared at 12:23 a.m., same as always. She browsed the snack aisle, her faded blue jacket dripping water that evaporated before it hit the floor. When she approached the counter and asked her question, Emma was waiting. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Mom, it's me. It's Emma. I'm okay. I've always been okay." Margaret stared at her daughter, really stared, seeing past the decades, recognizing something in Emma's face that transcended time. Then she started to cry, not the hollow, searching grief of her loop, but real tears, present tears. "My baby," she whispered. "My beautiful baby girl." They held each other for a long time. When Margaret finally faded, she was smiling, and the water on her jacket had dried for the first time since 1998. Ingrid Bergstrom came next. Tommy's mother, 91 years old, but determined to see her son one last time. I wheeled her into the store at 4:15 a.m., positioned her by the counter, and waited. When Tommy walked in and saw her, he dropped the cordless phone he'd been reaching for. Mom, I'm sorry I'm late. I tried to call, but I know, sweetheart." Ingrid reached out, took his hand. "I got your message. I've always known you were trying to reach me." Tommy Bergstrom graduated to wherever the released go, still wearing his Letterman jacket, still 17 years old, but finally at peace. The store is different now. Gunnar has noticed it too. The atmosphere lighter, the nights less oppressive. We still follow the rules for the visitors who remain, but there's a purpose to it now, a mission. Lily Johansson is next. Her brother Anders visits her memorial every October, and I've been working up the courage to contact him. To explain that his sister has been crying in a stockroom for 53 years, and that maybe, just maybe, he could help her find her way home. Harold Lindqvist will be harder. His family scattered after the fire, and I haven't found anyone connected to him yet. But I'm looking. I'll keep looking until every loop is closed. The Cascade Corner stop sits at the crossroads of 3 old logging roads, a way station between the living and the dead. For decades, it was a place of haunting. Now it's becoming something else. A place of healing. A place of reunion. A place where the lost can finally be found. My name is Derek Halverson, and I work the graveyard shift. I wouldn't have it any other way.